what I could not do. If you told me I couldn't do something, I was rather hard-headed. I was going to show you that I could do it anyway. Well, that got me into a lot of trouble. Certain practices were never questioned. I suppose they had been around so long that we just accepted them as the way things were. For example, it didn't bother me to eat at a separate lunch counter in the basement of a downtown department store. It seemed normal to go around to the back of a restaurant to get what you wanted to eat. It was just part of the order of things. It was part of the order of things that we called them 5 and dime stores. I don't know what we call them now, but 5 and 10 cent stores. It was normal for them, if you were black and you saw the peanuts in the big container and wanted some peanuts, it was normal for them to put peanuts for you in a brown paper bag, where the grease from the peanuts would bleed through the bag before you could get to the front door. But if you were white, your peanuts were placed in a wax-lined white paper bag that didn't bleed. Now, invariably, my mother had her peanuts were always placed in a wax-lined white paper bag. Why? Because she was so light-skinned, with hazel green eyes and long brunette hair, that she was often mistaken for white. That too I just accepted as the way things were. As I got older and became able to start, you're 16, you want your driver's license. My dad had taken me down to the Department of Motor Vehicles to get my license, and of course, I thought I did okay, but I failed the driver's test. 2 weeks later, my mother took me down to get a driver's license, and I passed. I sailed right through the exam, and on the way out, the lady told my mama, she said, "Your girl didn't do too well, but I passed her anyway, because I know she needs a way to work." What they thought was that I was my mother's maid, so they passed me. From that point, it got to be a family joke. If you want to go get your driver's license, ask my mother to take you. And 9 out of 10 times you would pass. But segregation wasn't funny, because it often brought out a hot temper of mine, and I would openly rebel. For example, although the lunch counters in the department stores went unquestioned, the separate water fountains posed a challenge. And when we would go, my mother would take us to town, there were these water fountains, and there was this store at home called Loveman's Department Store that had this glistening white porcelain water fountain between 2 polished brass elevators. And around the corner was a dirty old fountain that had a sign that read, "Colored only." Well, while my mother was looking at something at the counter, I walked over and started drinking out of this white water fountain. I think I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I was shocked when a man came up to me and snatched me away from the fountain. He threw me on the floor and said, "You know better than to be drinking from this water fountain." Well, my mother was the fearful type. She gathered me up quickly and we left the store. And when I got home, I got a whipping for being disobedient. I knew it was wrong to drink from that fountain, but I wanted to do it anyway. Another occasion, we took the streetcar in the days of streetcars. We took a streetcar to town. And you have to know that on the streetcars, the sections are separated by a board, colored on one side, white on the other side. We got on the streetcar, and there's no place for my mother and me to sit. So I got on and I moved the board forward a seat. And I sat down and I beckoned for my mother to come over and sit down. But she wouldn't. She would not sit with me. She remained fearfully standing. And when I got home, I got another whipping. My sister said, "You shouldn't get up and talk about the whippings that you received. People are going to think you were abused." I said, "They were not spankings, they were whippings." For much of my youth, the normal things that kids did, like walk home from school, we couldn't do. My sister and I couldn't walk home from school. When I reached high school age and went to high school, I just knew I'd be able to walk home then. But that was out of the question. Because of my dad's controversial cases, and because our family was under constant threats from the Ku Klux Klan, I was taken to school and picked up and brought from school. But every now and then, I would give the person sent to pick me up the slip. I would go out of the back of the school. He was in the front of the school. I'd go out the back so that I could walk home with my boyfriend. That's all I wanted to do, was have a little social life after school. There was even a kidnapping attempt on my sister. The man showed up at school and said that he had been sent to pick her up. But thanks to a quick-thinking teacher who called my dad, who had not sent such a person over, that kidnapping attempt failed. I was scolded time and time again by my mother, primarily for my defiance. And it got worse as I realized that not only were we different because we were black, but we were different because we were the family of Arthur Shores, a man who dedicated 53 years of his legal practice to bringing about, eliminating discrimination, bringing about racial equality. A man who for 10 years was the only practicing attorney, black attorney, in the state of Alabama. A man who from 1938 to 1970 was a part of all of the principal litigation involving civil rights in the state of Alabama. It was in 1938 that my dad filed suit against the Board of Registrars to require them to register 7 black school teachers to vote. And the federal courts required that the Board of Registrars register these teachers. That was in 1938. In 1941, it was my dad who argued all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court that a white-only railroad union could not exclude blacks because they were not members of a union, and then deny them better jobs. This case set the precedent to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If you're interested in the case, it's Bester Steel versus L&N Railroad. It was my dad in 1942 who filed suit on behalf of a black principal, William Bolin, to have the salaries of black teachers made equal to those of white teachers. The federal courts decided that salaries be made equal, but it took Birmingham 4 years to comply with this order, and it's only when they were held in contempt of court that they finally comply. It was my dad in 1948 who represented Senator Glenn Taylor from Idaho after his arrest in Birmingham for deliberately going through a door marked colored only and drinking from a colored only water fountain. It was my dad in 1950 who filed suit to declare the zoning laws of Birmingham unconstitutional. If you were black, we have a street in Birmingham called Center Street. If you were black, you could not live east of Center Street. You couldn't live west of Center Street, you could only live east of Center Street. Well, he represented a lady who had bought a lot on the west side of Center Street. And on the day that Judge Clarence Mullins declared the law unconstitutional and invalid, Miss Monk's home was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan to the ground. But perhaps the most famous of all cases that he's noted for is that of Arthurine Lucy versus the University of Alabama. This was the initial litigation that broke the die-hard resistance to desegregating public schools in Alabama. But Miss Lucy only lasted a few days because of an uproar and rioting on campus. She was eventually suspended and not allowed to attend school. It was not until 1963, in his representation of Vivian Malone and James Hood, did he succeed in permanently breaking down the color barrier at the University of Alabama. I noted that it was during this time that Thurgood Marshall often frequented our home because he was head of the NAAC legal counsel. My father was an attorney for that organization. So he handled a lot of these cases. And he and Mr. Marshall worked a lot together. And I remember I liked Mr. Marshall a lot because he always had time to play with my sister and me. There's a picture of me at the age of 13 riding his back in my cowboy suit because I like to play cowboys, and he was my horse. And he galloped through the living room as I hit him with my rope and told him to giddy up. I've shared with you briefly excerpts from my childhood because I have found it impossible for us to navigate our future if we don't know from whence we've come. And as I said, knowledge of the past helps us put our vision for the future into perspective. None of us would deny that, yes, we have made significant gains in the struggle for equality. But let me remind you that the extension of American democracy is not complete. That the American dream for all has not been fully realized. You see, it's not enough to open the gates of opportunity. We have to have the ability to walk through those gates. We have not only sought freedom, but opportunity, not just legal equity, but equality as a fact of life. So our task over the last few years has been to see that African Americans have the same chance as every other American to learn, to grow, to work, and share in society, to develop our abilities, and to pursue our individual happiness. Yes, things have gotten better over the past 5 decades. And America can be proud of that. But today there's still racism and there's still growing concern for economic equality. I've learned a lot of things in my lifetime, and I've learned that when the economy is poor, that racism has a tendency to raise its ugly head, and people become embattled to fight to survive, to maintain equal rights, to find jobs. We're all, as men and women, born with the same range of ability. But ability is not just the product of birth. Ability is increased or decreased by the family you live in, by the community you live in, by the schools you go to, and by the poverty or richness of your surroundings. For the great majority of African Americans, the poor, the unemployed, the homeless, despite all of the legislative victories, despite all of the speeches, inequality and lack of opportunity and racism is still alive, and it's growing. After all, electing the nation's first black president does not mean we are a post-racial nation, but something more complex and complicated. Whether you're born in poverty or prosperity, our next generation is going to inherit an economy weakened by business failures, stagnant wages, increasing inequality, and deep divisions among the American people. For today, we have but to read the paper to see that profound forces are shaking and remaking our nation and world. Halfway around the world today, terrorists are trying to hurt Americans, blow up embassies, and many have been killed. Many of our people have been killed. The answer that